Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Chancellor Robert R. Livingston Masonic Library of the Grand Lodge of New York. My name is Wong, and I'm the librarian of the collection's 60,000 books and our extensive archives. I'm also the lecturer for tonight as well. We are a special collections library open to the public, so anyone may come in to utilize our resources. We also have many circulating books, which we mail out to any New York State Freemason. To help focus use of our circulating collection, we have 17 entirely self-directed reading courses. Please do not hesitate if you would like to sign up for these courses. If you are not a Mason in New York State, you are welcome to come to the library to read the books in-house. And we are so pleased you could also attend our 5th lecture of the 2017 monthly lecture series entitled Treasures of the Library. So before we begin, we'll be showcasing some of the highlights of our collection, which are here on this table. You are welcome to come and take a closer look, but please wait until after the lecture to come up and peruse them at your own leisure. So just for a brief overview, our institution is split into 3 main sections: the museum, the library, and the archives. Working with this collection, there is the sense that there is a bit of extraordinary history behind everything we have in the 3 divisions of our institution. Our curator, Catherine Walter, is in charge of the 50,000-piece artifact collection of the library's museum division. Items date from the 1700s to the present, including items that range from the size of a lapel pin to the size of a sword. From this division, a number of artifacts are currently on display. Specifically, on my left, we have the Washington letter, which also has, interestingly enough, a lock of his hair. We also have the Benjamin trowel, in that case itself. And also in our stacks, in our vault area, we also have certain trinkets that are presidential based, such as, for instance, someone had apparently snapped the wood from Abraham Lincoln's casket, and now we have it in the back. So what is amazing about these artifacts is that they can be sitting quietly in this room, but their history is astounding and greater than what it can be initially assumed. So for instance, after this lecture you can look. To the left over here around the corner, there is a grandfather clock that no longer ticks. However, if you look at the history itself, it used to stand in the lodge rooms when George Washington, our Marquis de Lafayette, visited Yorktown Lodge and at the Masonic banquet held following the surrender of Cornwallis. Now, it silently sits in our library as a reminder of the presence of Freemasons in the American Revolutionary War. Similarly, to my right, in the corner in the back, there are jewels that were recovered from the headquarters of the Gestapo in Berlin. The jewels had originated from French and German lodges, which were shut down in the 1930s by the Nazi regime. They were retrieved by Captain Alphonse Felice, who was part of Cirrus Lodge number 208, who upon discovering the jewels, coincidentally, also realized that the 2 men who were with him, Colonel Chamberlain and Major Newman, were also Freemasons. Besides these very physical items, Ms. Walter is also in charge of more fragile and ephemeral material. For instance, in the museum world, fabric is known to be one of the more difficult types of materials to preserve and store due to the aging of fibers and the oil from hands. However, as can be seen in the corner back there, there's a small display of Knights Templar ribbons, which is only a very small percentage of the collection that we have. And in addition, she has put together an exhibit on the Masonic aprons downstairs in the Wendell Walker Lounge that was put on for the Grand Lodge Convention. With her care and handling, these materials have been preserved for future generations to peruse. It is important to keep these materials around as they provide the historical context for much of the information that is referenced in both the collection's books and archives. Speaking of books, for myself, the books in our collection are currently being cataloged by our cataloger, Georgia Herschel, where she is inputting bibliographic records in our online library catalog system. The books in our collection mainly range from the late 1700s up to the present day. I myself, having always an interest in rare books and special collections, working with these books has been a very fascinating experience. Like the artifacts, the books here provide historical context, both from the modern and past perspective. My current favorite right now is actually a Bible from 1917. So it's this one. This little Bible says Holy Bible, Sea and Field Lodge, number 1, F and AM, State of New York. So while you're looking at this Bible, it's just very common, very small. It doesn't seem very, astounding and interesting. But if you actually look at the record that is attached to it, it is actually a pocket Bible that was carried by members of Sea and Field Lodge No. 1, FNAM, when they fought in World War I with the American Expeditionary Force in Europe. So this book has seen much more than I have ever seen. So it's interesting to see, especially with our collection, that something so small and what could almost be considered insignificant can hold so much history within its binding. And then another book that I also personally really love is this small, very small book called Tactics for the Knights Templar. It's very small. It's actually from 1865, so have to be very careful holding it up here. So what happens is that my personal favorite bit is that besides including, information about the Knights Templar and ceremonial, what I personally love is this the illustrations that are in the book itself. So one of the things is that it shows, besides this one, it shows the different types of ceremonial dress and presentation/decorum of the Knights Templar. So books like this are very important because they show how different time periods can cause changes in dress, but all still while maintaining respect for an organization's history. So the main difference I see is that people weren't technically wearing ties back then in 1865. They were more within the cravat. The cravats were more in fashion. So something so small as like this can provide the context of how the Knights Templar were operating back in the 1860s, which we can't experience ourselves because we're not time travelers, but we can always use the books to understand. So, what was it? So that was the book section, and so I'm in charge of that, but I'm also in charge of the archives. So our archives also hold a multitude of materials, ranging from the 1700s to the present. Materials here can range from communications to returns and ephemeral broadsides. If you can think of it, it's probably in there. And so all of the archives, they're currently being stored in these gray archival boxes for preservation purposes, because we don't want things to fall apart within 20 years. So while we are focused mainly in New York State, we do have material, for instance, from other countries. So just for a sampling, we have material from Scotland, we have material from Ireland, Cuba, but specifically here we have communications from the Grand Lodge of England that date back to 1775 to 1795. So much older than I think anyone in this room. So for instance, these were kind of how the communications were distributed within England at the time in the 1700s. And I always find these interesting because these are after the American Revolutionary War. So it is interesting to see, for instance, back in the day, the Grand Lodge of England had had approved of several lodges that were within New York State itself. So, but currently, as you can see, because it is after the American Revolutionary War, they're no longer listed on these communications. So, besides that, the archives can also sometimes show other sides of the lives of the brothers of the fraternity. So for one instance is Henry Altmann, who lived in about the 1850s, and we had recently acquired a collection of ephemera and documents that were pertaining to him. His family had graciously donated them to the institution. And so one thing is, besides you have his Masonic paperwork, of course, within the folders. We also got to see another side of Henry Altmann. So for instance, we have his militia paperwork, we have his immigration paperwork, and we also have, for instance, his census paperwork. So currently the census is something I'm sure we're all familiar with. But back then, and today, nowadays, it's more of like, you fill in bubbles, it's all electronically done. But back in the day, when Henry Altmann was a census marshal, this is how the census was taken. So very different from how organized it is today. The most information you get is maybe, so for instance, you have population, native voters, persons who can read and write, and people who can't read and write. And then here, for instance, is people who have married during the past year and people who can read over the age of 21. So besides when you were looking in the archives for specific people, information like this can show ways that besides that they are part of Freemasonry, they are also showing the ways that brothers are contributing to society in their jobs, in their own activities within their lives. But also, I always feel like the archives can be very fun. So one of my favorite finds when I was processing a lot of the material back there is that we have, for instance, letters by FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So one of the materials that I have here. So he was talking to Isaiah H. Vrooman, and so Vrooman had basically said, what was it? The state office building in Albany, all the seals are wrong, everything's wrong, nothing is right. So what Franklin Delano Roosevelt answered, he answered specifically concerning every seal that was within Vrooman's, the ones that he had a discrepancy with. So this is from him. This is when Franklin Delano Roosevelt was a governor. So at this time he was not president. So we are very grateful that people have saved this because of what happened. But then one of my favorite parts is that he says that the state architecture should have used the libraries and archives because then he might have gotten things correct. So as a librarian, that is something I can very much agree with. And then two more things from the archives. So a lot of things that we also have are also ephemera material. So one of the things that I always liked is to see how people were living back in the day as well as events. So for instance, over here, we have, so basically when people tell you to throw out your playbills, you really shouldn't because someone's going to be using it in the future. So one of the things we have here is for the Grand Musical and Masonic Festival that was held at the Tabernacle for the benefit of the Asylum Fund of Widows and Orphans back in 1844. So basically, this is one of the broadsides that was used to advertise the event. And then after that, we also have the program. So basically, it shows just how the Freemasons and the brothers were using their connections to help benefit people who were not as well off at the moment. And then, of course, one of the things that is used a lot within our archives are also the lodge files that are, they're used a lot for the genealogy research. So, for instance, I have here from Holland Lodge, I have one of their files that they have several files in the back, but I only took one. Basically, so part of my job is to also work within the genealogy field. So you're always looking for people's names, basically. So that's where these pre-1900 lodge files come very handy with the returns and things of that nature. But just reading the files themselves, they are interesting in themselves as well. So for instance, this is the original petition for Holland Lodge from 1787. Something of interest that I think these are always very important because of the people who sign the name, because especially sometimes the people who are signing for petitions versus warrants, they can change over time because people move and things of that nature. So as I was saying, genealogy work is almost like a treasure hunt where you take a person's name and you basically scour through our entire stacks trying to find them through our various different resources. So besides using the lodge files, we also use other things such as returns, the registers, microfiche. If anyone remembers microfiche, I get to use half of my day still using those. It was a bit of a shock, but I'm becoming a pro at it. But in addition, though I have been talking a lot about these physical aspects of the library, there is, in accordance with the modern digital age, many of these physical items are being preserved in a digital manner. So, as I was saying, we have the lodge historical files, which this one is the pre-1900 file. for Holland Lodge. But also, you know, Holland Lodge is still around. So we also have the post-1900 file. So it's, and once again, this is only one out of several files that are in the back for Holland Lodge. So basically what we're doing is that all of these materials, for all the lodges that have contributed, they have been digitized and scanned. They are available on our website through the Lodge Historical Files. Unfortunately, we have not gotten into the process of scanning the pre-1900s just because for the fact of the safety of the material. But for the post-1900, the paper quality is much tougher, so it can go through the scanning process very well. So what happens is that these are all currently available online, and these are also used for research for lodges, genealogy, events that have happened in the past. And so what happens is that now we still have the physical copies in the back in the stacks, but having this digital copy makes it easier for access for people who maybe can't come into the library during library hours or who are not within New York City. They too can access the resources of their lodges using an internet connection. And going off of that, we also have book digitization projects that are happening throughout the library. So one of the best examples is two of these books. So books over time, books are, as Professor Altmann said, books are meant to be used. But as a result, books fall apart. So that's what happens. It's no fault of anyone, it's just age and time. But it's things like this where you would want to digitize the book because at some point the paper is very acidic, so it's going to get very crumbly. The whole spine is good. At some point, every once in a while, every library will have the problem where the book is split in half, and one is at one end of the room, and the other half of the book is somewhere else, and no one knows where it belongs to. So our digital technician, Mr. Patzner, has been digitizing a lot of the proceedings that are, so we just finished the Royal Arch proceedings, because those are very important parts of the history of this brotherhood and fraternity. So, and just for another example, all the text. It's not in the book anymore, but we keep in the original binding for historical sake. And then, so basically, as I was saying, the digitization of the proceedings are very important because they help to retain history that goes back. We have the proceedings go back to the early 1800s that we have back there. So at some point, you always have to be careful that, sometimes things just don't go according to plan and things fall apart, things get damaged. By preserving them in the digital world, we always have a copy available that can be used for research and general perusing to read. And then lastly, we also offer scanning services. So what happens is that we have two main scanning devices that we use. So in the back over there in the staff office, we have a huge book scanner. It's much bigger than I am, it's like about this tall. And so that is used, for example, to digitize things like this, because what happens is that the machine is set up so that it's like when you place a material in there, it's in a V shape, and therefore it just naturally fits within the equipment itself. And then another thing is that has everyone seen like the big warrants and all of the big warrants themselves? They can be very big, so therefore we do not want to be putting it into a V-shaped scanning machine. So that's where a machine like this would come into handy, where basically you would put it down on the table, and then there's a revolving spiral camera over there, and it will take an image of the whole thing, and therefore you don't damage the material, but you are still able to get an image in itself. And so that is basically just a brief, nice overview of the treasures that we have in our library. You are always welcome to come back and look at the other 60,000 books, 50,000 artifacts that we have in the back there. But as of right now, I would just like to open the floor if anyone has any questions.
Just one question. My lodge is got 50 years old. Scotian Lodge. Is that online now? Could I get information or I have to come here?
So what happens is that if you just talk to one of us after the lecture, we can show you how to get access to the Lodge historical files online. They're post-1900s, if that's the information you were looking for. That you can view outside of the library. Pre-1900 is...
Goes back to 1865.
Okay, so the ones that are pre-1900, you would have to probably come to the library itself to see the material, just because we're a little bit wary of trying to scan material that can fall apart on us. But we are anything after 1900, you can view anywhere. So, but if you're interested after the Q&A, we can pull the folder out for you to take a look at. Mm-hmm.
So, are you the person to talk to for past minutes of a chapter, so to speak?
Yes.
All right, so let's talk after.
Okay.